Welcome to Lectures by Lobezi. Today, we're going to continue our discussion of the causes of World War I. In our previous video, we talked about the term mania and how that applies to the, I guess as an acronym for the causes of World War I. So I want to talk about alliances right now. Okay. So the term alliance is a defensive, or usually, typically, it's like an agreement between one or more countries or two more countries who, for specific reasons, have decided to enter into an agreement where they'll defend each other should the other country be attacked by, a third country. So what we're going to see is that this alliance system, which was initially designed to prevent war, actually pulls all of Europe into the war, and then we get ourselves into the First World War. All right, and so I'm just going to, on the surface, sort of describe what the two alliance systems are or were, and then there'll later on be a specific example shared where you'll see like exactly where the alliances created the World War. But anyway, I digress. Triple Alliance refers to the alliance, as you can see there, of Austria, Hungary, Germany, and Italy. I'll show you here a map of these alliances in just a second. And then the other alliance system really technically wasn't one. It was known as an entente, which is a French term, which means something, it's like an arrangement, if you will. But for our purposes, we're just going to throw it in there as an alliance system. And that includes the countries of France, Great Britain, and Russia. And so what these two alliances represent are counter blocks against one another. And, you have some old enemies in France and Great Britain working together. And even old enemies, Germany. Before it was Germany, it was Prussia. They had gone to war with Austria-Hungary. So now that they are linked in an alliance system, just means that countries from time to time have different goals, and sometimes they have to make new friends when old friendships with other countries don't really suit their purposes anymore. But anyway, so there you go. This is the Triple Alliance: Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. And you can see how that was established in 1882. And then we have the Triple Entente, which is Great Britain, France, and Russia. So just familiarize yourself with those six countries. Once the war begins, the names of the alliance systems will change, and some of the countries will change sides as well. But we'll get into that later. So this slide here is of Otto von Bismarck. He's the guy that was behind as the Chancellor of Prussia. When we first learned about him, we learned that he was the guy that was behind the unification of Germany. Okay, so after the last war of German unification, which was the Franco-Prussian War, which I also mentioned in the previous video, Germany declared itself a satisfied power. And what that really means is they weren't interested in any more aggression. All they wanted was to create a Germany. And once that was achieved, they were satisfied. They didn't have any reason to continue their march across Europe. They absolutely could have and conquered other countries, but that's not what they were in it for. They were just wanting to create a unified Germany. And so after that, Germany sort of becomes the peace broker for the continent, which many people find ironic because of that they were a country that was created out of warfare, or was created as a result of warfare, but yet they want to make peace with their neighbors. But one of the things that Otto von Bismarck realizes, and so he goes down in history as a very influential figure. He is considered by many historians as a very capable diplomat, and that might be his most, or that might be his best quality, or his strength was his ability to deal with other countries successfully. And at any rate, he knows that since Germany has taken Alsace and Lorraine, that France is and always will be their enemy, because they want revenge. Or in French, we call it revanche, I think. I don't know. It sounds good anyway, but that's neither here nor there. But the point is that he recognizes that as long as Germany has that territory, France is always going to be an enemy. So what he wants to do is isolate France. And what does that mean? He wants to make sure that France doesn't have any friends, allies, because if they do, then they could potentially attack Germany. France won't do it without allies, because they've already been defeated by them when it was just Prussia, and now that it's a unified Germany, they're much larger, much stronger, and so that would be suicidal for the French to attack Germany without any allies. But the greatest fear that Germany has, and Otto von Bismarck realizes this, is that they're sort of geographically in the middle of Europe, and as such, they can be attacked from many different directions. And so Germany has a very large military, right? It has the largest military in Europe, it has the largest standing army, which is an advantage. But if, as this map indicates, you can see these two arrows, if they were to have to fight a two-front war, that means that they would be forced to divide their military. So, like, they would have to divide their military to face off Russia or France, should those two countries ever form an alliance, okay? Which they're going to, but not under Otto von Bismarck's watch. He successfully isolates France and prevents that from happening. But anyway, that's their greatest existential threat, is having to fight a two-front war, and so he wants to prevent that from happening. So this is where things begin to change when Kaiser Wilhelm II comes into power in 1888. So he succeeds his father, Kaiser Wilhelm I, and evidently he and Otto von Bismarck, who's the number two, he's the what do you call it, chancellor. They don't really get along with each other. I think that there was some jealousy because of how respected Otto von Bismarck was, and Kaiser Wilhelm II wanted to sort of demonstrate that he was in charge, and so he looked at Otto von Bismarck as a competition, rather than seeing him as wise and an asset and useful. He gets rid of him. He forces him to resign, and so that's where things sort of go south. All right, so when we talk about the causes of World War I, we say mania, M-A-N-I-A. If you were to add, a K to the end, that would make the word maniac. I know it's not spelled correctly, but who really cares about spelling these days? I mean, have you ever seen some of you guys' spelling? But if, let's just say, that's how you spelt maniac, somebody who suffers from mania, somebody who's a little crazy, that would sort of also fit as a cause. Like, if all of those terms represented the causes of World War I, Kaiser Wilhelm II would be the K. He would be the final cause of the war, because his poor leadership skills really get Germany into some pickles. All right, and the greatest fear that Germany had, and that is to fight a two-front war, right, is realized. And so, who's to blame? Well, Kaiser Wilhelm II is. And what am I talking about here? Well, first off, if we go back a slide, because Germany realized that a two-front war was such a potential, disaster for Germany, he made sure that he was able to forge an alliance system. And this is before the Triple Alliance or Triple Entente or anything. This is back in the early 1880s. He forms an alliance between Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Russia. And basically, the purpose of this was because they're all really empires and they all have some different, although Germany doesn't have as many ethnic minority groups, there are some Slavic people, some Polish people in this region. But what he was going for was this idea of principle of intervention, like preventing internal revolutions, and that since each one of these were technically, I guess, an empire, and they had ethnic minority groups that might want to rise up to gain their independence, that could cause internal problems. And so it was in their best nature to forge an alliance with one another, even though Russia and Austria-Hungary didn't get along, as mentioned in the previous video, because there were Slavic people who lived inside of Austria-Hungary and they weren't treated very well. The Russians were able to look past that and thought it would be a good idea for these three countries to be in what was known as the Three Emperors Club. Okay? Well, when this guy, the Kaiser, gets on the throne of Germany, he allows the Three Emperors Club treaty to lapse, and he doesn't re-up it. Doesn't really consider that Russia would forge an alliance with France, which is exactly what happened. All right, so one of the first things that he does is he doesn't re-up that treaty, the Three Emperors Club, with Russia and Austria-Hungary. He still maintains the alliance system that he has with Austria, but he allows Russia to not re-up. Okay, and so what does Russia do? They forge an alliance with France, and what fear? The two-front war fear is now realized. So that's one of the ways that he demonstrates poor leadership. Another one, and it's in your study guide, he gave an interview to a British newspaper. And in it, the goal of what he was trying to do was to reassure the British people that the Germans and the English were like natural allies because they're both Germanic, okay? Even the British, even though they speak English, historically they're Germanic people. But anyway, in this newspaper interview, he does a really poor job of reassuring the British people that they don't have anything to fear from Germany. And in fact, he insults the British people, and I think that does a lot to damage relations between the two countries. So again, it just, that interview is another example of his poor leadership. And so that's what all this is about, that Kaiser Wilhelm II was not a very good leader, and he's part of the reason that Germany gets pulled into World War I. Okay? So the final cause is the assassination, okay? And the assassination is of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Okay, so what does that mean, Archduke? Well, he was the he was the heir to the throne, rather, to the Austria-Hungarian throne. Okay, so when his father died, Franz Joseph, he would assume the throne. Anyway, he was assassinated, he and his wife Sophie, and that's going to trigger a war between Austria-Hungary and Serbia. All right. Well, we got to dive into understand this a little bit to understand why he was assassinated, and who did it, and then you'll kind of hopefully see why this was the this was the final, like the final straw. So he gets assassinated June 28th, 1914. He and his wife go down to Bosnia and Herzegovina. All right here. This is that territory that had been annexed, right? When the Ottomans kind of fell away, right? And Serbia had wanted to annex them, but Austria did so first, right? So this causes tension, right? We already talked about this between Serbia and Austria-Hungary. Well, there was this nationalistic group known as the Black Hand, all right? And really, I mean, if we're being honest, they were a terrorist group, okay? And this group plotted to have him and his wife assassinated because he went down there like on a state visit to the capital, Sarajevo, and there was like a parade held in his honor. And as he was driving through the streets, the members of the Black Hand kind of lined themselves up along the parade route to, whenever the first one got a shot at him, that they were to take it. So the reason why they wanted to do that was it was revenge, for Austria-Hungary taking Bosnia from Serbia. All right. Now the people that were selected to be the assassins were really nobodies, but once it was figured out that the Serbian government, like key people within the Serbian government, were members of the Black Hand, that's when calls for war started, and the calls were for Austria-Hungary to declare war on Serbia because the Serbian government was behind the hit, if that makes sense. All right. So anyway, they drive down there. And they go through this parade, and they are assassinated by a man whose name is Gavrilo Princip. So he's the 19-year-old Serbian nationalist. And they beat a confession out of him, and then they figured out that with the investigation that there was a lot of people who were high-ranking members in the not only in the Serbian government, but in the Serbian military. And so the newspapers back in Austria and Vienna ran stories about this, and there was outrage, as one might expect. That how could Serbia be given a pass, even though they weren't directly tied to it. There were certainly indirect ties, right? And so basically, the remedy for this was going to be that the Austria-Hungarian government wants to send down like secret police who have the ability to arrest Serbian members. So they want to go into Serbia and to conduct an investigation. Okay, and Serbia doesn't want that because it would be a national sort of disgrace if all of this would be uncovered, just like because the plot, the conspiracy went all the way to the top, and it would implicate a lot of high-ranking Serbian governmental officials. So the government wants to protect itself, and so they don't want to give permission. They say, well, we're going to conduct an investigation ourselves, and rest assured that the people who are responsible will be brought to justice. But if you're Austrian, you don't believe that. I mean, why would you, right? So they put pressure on them to allow that, okay? And in fact, they issue an ultimatum. They do. And an ultimatum is when you are given a sort of a choice. Like you either do this or this is going to be the consequence, right? Maybe your parents have done that, Hey, Ma, can I borrow the car to go out tonight? And, your parents are like, yeah, sure, but we want you to do the dishes. And then later on, they see that, of course, you haven't done the dishes because, like, why would you? Because it's like work and stuff. So they say, okay, if you don't do the dishes, you're not going to be able to use the car. That's an ultimatum, right? They're forcing you to do something that you don't want to do because there's a consequence attached to it. At least that's what parents used to do. I don't know if they do that as much anymore. All right. So yeah, so they issued an ultimatum to Serbia, said we want to come in there, and there's a question on your study guide about this that said, I mean, it's got the Serbian response, and the Serbian response is like, we can't allow you to come into our country and conduct this investigation. So they turned the ultimatum down. They failed to respond to it. You know what I mean? And so Austria declares war. Oh, there's something else. Serbia is a little tiny country, okay, in relationship to Austria-Hungary, and there's no way that they could put up a good fight against Austria-Hungary. So the only way that they can refuse the ultimatum is if they got some backup. You know what I'm saying? So who would they turn to? Right? Who would Serbia turn to? Well, what is Serbia? I told you earlier, they're Slavic, right? They're a Slavic country. So they need somebody who's got their back. So who might have their back? Russia, right? Because they're the protector of all of Europe's Slavic people. And so they turn to Russia and ask for their support should war come, and Russia agrees. Okay? So this emboldens Serbia to reject the ultimatum because they wouldn't have been able to if they didn't have the help of Russia, because then they would get squashed. All right? But at any rate, within, let's see, a month later, so June 28th is the assassination, important date. Also important date is July 28th, because that's 1 month after the assassination, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is the beginning of World War I. So the war begins. It's not a world war initially. Initially, it's just Austria declaring war on Serbia. All right, and then everybody else gets pulled in. All right. Well, what does Austria do? Austria turns to its strong ally, Germany. And in this case, like, Germany and Austria, even though they're both sizable, like relatively matched as far as the same size of countries, they're not equal as far as power is concerned. Germany is far more powerful, much more industrialized than Austria-Hungary. So in this relationship, it's like Germany's the big brother. And so Austria is asking Germany if it's okay for them to declare war on Serbia. So they wouldn't have done it unless they had the support. And what does Kaiser Wilhelm II do? He offers what's known as the blank check. And that's sort of unconditional support that Germany is going to give to Austria-Hungary to wage war against Serbia. All right? So that is what triggers the war. All right, so Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia, July 28, 1914. All right, and then what is a good way to sort of think of this is back in the old days before people used to play video games, for entertainment, they would take dominoes and then they would line these dominoes up on a table right next to each other, and then they would push them over to kind of see them, fall, and then if you get hundreds or even thousands of pieces, you can line them all up and they go, like when the first one goes, eventually the last one will go. And so when you think of the war, the way the war goes, after this, it's like a bunch of dominoes falling. And I'll kind of show you what I mean here in just a sec. All right. Okay. So even before Austria declared war on Serbia, the Russians began mobilizing their troops. Why? Well, because Russia is a big country, and for them to get all their troops and supplies to the front lines is going to take a long time. So if Austria wants to declare war on Serbia, the Russians want to be in position to be able to defend Serbia. Make sense? So even before Austria declares war on Serbia, the Russians begin mobilizing their troops. And what does that mean? It's just bringing them to the front lines. And again, Russia's a big old country, and they don't have a lot of railroads anyway, so it's a timely process. So Germany tells Russia to stand down, stop the mobilization of troops, and Russia refuses. Okay, so this is going to trigger Germany to declare war on Russia, and then also to declare war on Russia's strongest ally, France. And then Austria-Hungary responds by declaring war on Russia. All right, so these dates right here show how we are now in World War I. So by August 5th, the war is a world war. All right, and other countries are going to get involved later on. Okay, and what's interesting about this whole thing is that people were super excited to go to war because they assumed that their countries would win. And that was, it was like the patriotic thing to do, to support war. But people didn't understand just how deadly this war was going to be. And that's due in large part to the technology and the technological changes that have happened even since Prussia defeated France in the Franco-Prussian War in 1870. I mean, that's 44 years in the past, and the technology has drastically changed. And so this is going to be a bloodbath, and that's what the next video we'll talk about. All right, so thanks for listening to Causes of World War I Part 2. Catch you later.